Welcome to the Dangerous Soul Love Stories. The channel will bring you stories of strong bonds, cultural differences, passionate love, and unforgettable dramatic events. If you love interracial love stories and cinematic storytelling, then this is the place for you. Enjoy listening. Please subscribe to the channel to hear more great stories.
I signed away my last name in a room full of men who would have killed to carry it. No one spoke when the pen touched the paper. They did not need to. Silence has always been the language of power in my world. Every man in that room understood what I was doing even if they could not understand why. The Shin name was not just a name. It was protection, authority, a network that stretched from Chicago to places most people only hear about in whispers. It was something men bled for, something enemies feared before they ever saw your face. And I was giving it up. My father stood across the table from me, his expression carved from something colder than anger. Disappointment. That was worse. "You do not walk away from blood," he said, his voice low, controlled, like he was still giving me a chance to correct a mistake. I did not look away. I had spent my entire life not looking away. "Then I am no longer Shin," I replied. The words settled into the room like a gunshot that no one heard but everyone felt. Let that sink in. I was not just rejecting a name. I was rejecting everything that came with it. The power. The protection. The certainty that no one would touch me without consequences. My mother closed her eyes for a brief second, not out of grief but calculation. She was already measuring what I was worth without the name, already deciding whether I was now a liability that needed to be removed. That is how my family loves. Strategically. Efficiently. Without hesitation. Around the table the council shifted slightly, not in sympathy but in awareness. I was no longer one of them. Not really. The contract in front of me was simple. Renounce all claim to the Shin legacy. Forfeit leadership rights. Surrender protection under the family structure. In return I would be allowed to walk away. Allowed. Even that word carried weight. Because in our world, leaving is not a right. It is something granted if you are still considered useful enough not to erase. I signed anyway. The ink had barely dried when the shift happened. It was subtle but I felt it immediately. The way their eyes changed. The way the room no longer bent around me. Power is not just what you hold. It is what others believe you can do. And in that moment I became just a man. No title. No shield. Just a target waiting to happen. My father spoke again, quieter this time. All of this for a woman who does not even belong in our world. I almost smiled at that. Because that was exactly the point. Danielle Scott did not belong in this world. She did not care about the Shin name. She did not care about the fear it carried or the doors it opened. The first time we met she did not ask who I was. She asked if I was going to show up or disappear like everyone else who made promises they could not keep. That was it. No curiosity. Just expectation. And for the first time in my life I realized something I had never allowed myself to see. Power means nothing to someone who only values presence. So I chose her. Not because it was logical. Not because it was safe. But because for the first time, I wanted something that had nothing to do with the name I was born into. As I stood up from that table, leaving everything behind, I felt something unfamiliar settle in my chest. Not fear. Not regret. Something sharper. Freedom mixed with uncertainty. Because I knew exactly what I had just done. I had not just walked away from my name. I had stepped into a world where no one would protect me anymore. And the only question left was this. Would she still be there when I had nothing left to offer but myself? I met Danielle Scott on a night that should have meant nothing. Chicago was loud, restless, alive in the way cities built on power always are, and I was exactly where I was expected to be. A fundraiser tied to one of our legitimate fronts. A room full of people who smiled too much and asked questions they already knew the answers to. I had security nearby, conversations mapped out before they even started, outcomes calculated before anyone shook my hand. That was my world. Predictable. Controlled. Empty in a way I had never admitted out loud. I stepped outside for air, more out of habit than need, and that was when I saw her. Danielle was sitting on the edge of the sidewalk, not dressed for the room behind me, not interested in it either. She was arguing with someone on the phone, her voice sharp but not careless, the kind of tone that comes from someone who refuses to be ignored. I should have walked past her. That would have been the efficient choice. But something about the way she held her ground, even in a conversation I was not part of, pulled my attention in a way I could not immediately explain. When she hung up, she noticed me watching. Most people look away when they realize who I am, even if they cannot place it exactly. There is a weight to power that people feel before they understand it. Danielle did not look away. She looked directly at me, measured me in a single glance, and said, "If you are going to stand there, at least do not stare like you own the sidewalk." I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because no one talks to me like that. Not without consequence. And yet there was no disrespect in her voice. Just honesty. I stepped closer, curious now in a way that felt unfamiliar. "Do you always talk to strangers like that?" I asked. She shrugged slightly, like the question itself was not worth much thought. "Only the ones who act like they are not used to being told no." Let that sink in. He did not know my name. She did not know what I controlled, what I could do with a single call. And still she spoke to me like I was just another man taking up space. We talked for a few minutes. Nothing important. At least that is what I told myself at the time. She told me she worked 2 jobs, that she was tired of people making promises they did not keep, that showing up mattered more than anything else. I asked her why. She looked at me like the answer should have been obvious. Because words are easy. Presence is not. That stayed with me longer than it should have. Over the next week, I found reasons to be in the same area again. Not planned. Not strategic. At least that is what I kept telling myself. The second time I saw her, she did not act surprised. She looked at me, nodded once, and said, "You showed up again." That was it. No questions. No curiosity about why. Just acknowledgement. And something about that felt more real than any conversation I had in rooms filled with people who knew exactly who I was. I started to notice the differences more clearly after that. Danielle did not ask what I did for a living. She did not try to impress me. When I offered to help her with something small, something that would have taken me seconds to fix, she refused without hesitation. "I am not a problem you get to solve," she said. "I take care of my own life." That should have frustrated me. I was used to being the solution, the man who made things easier, faster, cleaner. But instead it forced me to do something I had not done in years. Really listen. She told me about growing up without stability, about learning early that relying on the wrong person costs more than doing everything yourself. She did not say it like a complaint. She said it like a fact. That was the difference. No self-pity. No need for validation. Just truth. And I found myself drawn to that in a way that made no sense in the context of everything I had been taught to value. But the more time I spent with her, the harder it became to ignore the shift happening around us. My people started asking questions. Not directly, but enough to signal concern. A car appeared more than once on the same street when I was with her. A man lingered too long outside the building where she worked. Subtle things, but nothing in my world is ever random. I adjusted without telling her. I always adjust. It is how you survive. I moved her out of certain routines, changed patterns, rerouted potential threats before they could fully form. And she noticed. Of course she did. Danielle notices everything that matters. "You keep doing that," she said one night, standing across from me with her arms crossed, her expression calm but firm. "Doing what?" I asked, even though I already knew. "Trying to fix things I did not ask you to fix. Trying to control things that are not yours to control." Her words landed harder than any threat I had faced in a boardroom or a backroom deal. But she was right. And I did not have a clean answer for her. "You disappear when it matters," she continued, her voice steady, not accusing, just honest. "Then you show up and act like you can solve everything in one move. That is not how this works." I held her gaze, feeling something unfamiliar press against the control I usually maintained so easily. "And how does it work?" I asked quietly. She stepped closer, just enough that I could see the certainty in her eyes. "You show up. Consistently. Not when it is convenient. Not when you feel like it. You show up because you said you would. That is all I care about. Not your money. Not whatever you are hiding behind. Just that." Let that sink in. She was asking for something I had never been required to give. Not loyalty enforced by fear. Not respect built on power. Just presence. And that terrified me more than anything else. Because for the first time in my life, I realized I did not know if I could give it without losing everything else I had been trained to protect. The shift began the moment my family stopped pretending Danielle did not exist. In our world, silence is not absence. It is preparation. I noticed it in the way my calls were returned faster than usual, in the way certain conversations stopped when I entered the room, in the way my father started asking questions that had nothing to do with business and everything to do with control. Who have you been spending time with? Simple words. Casual tone. But nothing in my family is ever casual. I gave him nothing. Not because I was afraid, but because I understood the rules. The moment you give them something real, they turn it into leverage. That is how they survive. That is how they built everything I was born into. But they already knew. They always do. The meeting came 2 days later. Not scheduled. Not announced. Just a message that said be there. That alone told me everything I needed to know. When I walked into the room, the air felt different. Not tense. Not hostile. Just focused. My mother sat beside my father, her expression calm, but her eyes already measuring the outcome. Around them, the inner circle watched quietly, waiting to see how this would play out. No one spoke until I sat down. Then my father began. You have introduced a variable into your life that we did not approve. He did not say her name. He did not need to. I leaned back slightly, keeping my expression neutral. Since when do I need approval for who I see? That was a test. Not of them, but of how far I was willing to push. My father's gaze hardened just enough to signal the shift. Since the moment your choices affect the stability of everything we built, there was not concern, not protection, control. My mother spoke next, her voice softer but more precise. We have looked into her. Danielle Scott. She works 2 jobs. No criminal record. No known affiliations. On paper she is nothing. Let that sink in. In their world, being nothing is a problem. Because if you cannot be categorized, you cannot be controlled. And anything that cannot be controlled is considered a threat. She is not a threat, I said, my voice steady. That was my mistake. Not because it was untrue, but because I said it like I believed it more than I believed them. My mother's eyes narrowed slightly. That is exactly why she is dangerous. The room went quiet again. Not out of agreement, but because everyone understood what came next. This was no longer an observation. It was a decision waiting to be enforced. They tried everything before making it official. First, the subtle approach. Danielle's job became unstable overnight. Hours cut without explanation. A supervisor suddenly questioning her performance despite no prior issues. Then came the offers. Quiet, indirect. Opportunities that seemed too convenient, too perfectly timed. Money disguised as help. Paths designed to move her away from me without making it obvious. He turned all of it down. Of course she did. That only confirmed what they already suspected. She could not be bought. Then the pressure shifted. I noticed it in the way the surveillance became less careful. Cars no longer tried to blend in. People stopped pretending not to watch. They wanted me to see it. They wanted her to feel it. This was not about removing her quietly anymore. It was about forcing a reaction. And I reacted. That was my second mistake. I stepped in publicly, directly, using the authority I had always relied on. I shut down the pressure points, restored her job, removed the watchers, made it clear that anyone who touched her would answer to me. It worked. Temporarily. But Danielle saw something else in that moment. Something I had been trying to keep hidden. We stood outside her building that night, the city noise fading into the background as she looked at me with a kind of clarity that made it impossible to lie. You did that, she said. Not a question. A statement. I did not answer immediately. I did not need to. She exhaled slowly, like she was putting pieces together she never wanted to see. This is not normal, she continued. None of this is normal. The way people watch. The way things change around you. That is not coincidence. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. It is handled. You do not have to worry about it anymore. That was the wrong thing to say. Her expression hardened, not in fear but in frustration. You keep saying that like I asked you to handle anything. I did not. I asked you to show up. That is it. Her words cut deeper than anything my family had said. Because she was not attacking me. She was holding me accountable to something I had never been forced to give. You are trying to control my life the same way whatever you are hiding controls yours, she added, her voice steady but sharper now. I'm not going to be part of that. The distance between us felt wider in that moment than it ever had before. I was losing her not because of my family but because of the way I had been trained to exist. And for the first time I did not know how to fix it. I did not know how to be what she needed without becoming something my family would never accept. The final meeting came the next day. No subtlety this time. No strategy. Just truth. My father stood at the head of the room, his patience gone. This ends now, he said. Not a request. Not a warning. A command. You will cut her out of your life completely. No contact. No protection. No embargement. Or you will no longer be part of this family. The words landed exactly as they were meant to. Pling. Absolute. I did not speak right away. Not because I was unsure, but because I finally understood what this really was. Not about Danielle. Not about risk. About control. About making sure I remained exactly who they needed me to be. My mother's voice followed, quieter but just as final. She will destroy everything we built. That was their fear. Not that she would take something from us, but that she would take something from me. The version of me they had spent years shaping. I looked at them both, at the empire they had created, at the life I had never questioned until now. And for the first time I felt something shift in a way that could not be undone. Because standing there with everything on the line, I realized the truth they never expected me to see. If I chose them, I would keep my name. But I would lose myself. And if I chose her, I would lose everything else. The question was no longer what I was willing to protect. It was who I was willing to become. The room did not feel like a place anymore. It felt like a line. One I had been walking my entire life without realizing it was leading to this exact moment. My father stood in front of me not as a parent, but as the head of something that had no room for weakness. My mother sat beside him, silent now, because she already knew what I was about to do before I allowed myself to admit it. Around them the council waited. Not to influence the decision. Just to witness it. Because in our world choices like this are not private. They are recorded. Remembered. Used. I let the silence stretch longer than usual, not for effect but because for the first time I was not calculating outcomes. I was feeling the weight of what came after. If I chose them, everything stayed intact. The name. The power. The protection. The structure I had spent my life mastering. Danielle would be gone, erased from my world like she had never existed. Plain. Efficient. Final. If I chose her, I would lose all of it. Not gradually. Not partially. Completely. I would become something I had never been allowed to be. Exposed. Replaceable. Mortal in a way I had never experienced. Let that sink in. For someone like me, losing power is not just losing status. It is losing the shield that keeps you alive. My father broke the silence first. This is not complicated, he said, his voice steady, almost patient. You are choosing between stability and chaos. Between legacy and weakness. His words were designed to simplify something that was anything but simple. Because what he called weakness was the only thing that had ever made me feel real. I looked at him, then at my mother, then at the room that had defined every version of me until now. And I realized something they had never expected me to see. This was never about protecting the family. It was about controlling what I was allowed to value. I exhaled slowly, then spoke. I'm not cutting her out of my life. The words did not echo. They did not need to. The reaction was immediate, even in silence. My father's expression hardened, not in anger, but in recognition. He had heard the decision behind the statement. My mother's gaze sharpened, already adjusting to the outcome. Then you have made your choice, my father said. I nodded once. I have. There was no argument. No attempt to persuade me otherwise. That is not how power works at this level. Once a line is crossed, it is not negotiated. It is enforced. The contract was brought forward without another word. I had seen documents like this before, used on others who had become liabilities. I had just never imagined I would be the one signing it. Renunciation of name. Termination of rights. Removal from protection. The language was precise, legal, absolute. I picked up the pen, feeling the weight of something I had never questioned until now. Not the decision itself, but the finality of it. Once this was done, there was no returning. No reversal. No second chance. I thought about Danielle in that moment. Not in some abstract way, but in the simplest terms she had ever given me. Show up. That was all she had asked for. Not power. Not solutions. Just presence. And I realized something that made everything else fall into place. This was the first time in my life I was choosing something for myself. Not for the family. Not for the legacy. For me. I signed. The sound of the pen against the paper was quiet, but it carried more weight than any decision I had ever made. When I set it down, the shift was immediate. It was not dramatic. No one stood. No one reacted visibly. But I felt it. The invisible structure that had always surrounded me, always protected me, was gone. I was no longer Shin Woo-sik in the way the world understood that name. I was just Woo-sik. My father looked at me one last time, not with anger but with something colder. Finality. You have chosen selfishness over duty, he said. I met his gaze without hesitation. For the first time I am choosing something real. That was the difference he would never accept. My mother spoke then, her voice quiet, almost thoughtful. You will not survive this world without you. I did not respond. Because I knew something they did not. Danielle had survived long before I ever walked into her life. He did not need my world. My world needed to stay away from her. I turned and walked out of the room without waiting for dismissal. No one stopped me. That was the final confirmation. I was no longer theirs to control. The air outside felt different. Not lighter. Just unfamiliar. For the first time in my life, every step I took was my own. No structure. No expectation. Just consequence. I should have felt relief. Maybe I did, somewhere beneath everything else. But something else settled in its place. Awareness. Because I knew exactly what my family would do next. They would not come after me immediately. That would be inefficient. They would go after the reason I made this choice. Danielle. Not out of anger. Out of strategy. Remove the cause, eliminate the deviation, restore balance. That is how they think. That is how they operate. And for the first time I no longer had the power to stop them from a distance. I had chosen her. Now I had to protect that choice without the name that once made it possible. As I reached for my phone, already moving, already planning, one thought cut through everything else. This was no longer about proving anything to my family. This was about something far simpler. I had chosen her. Now I had to show up. I found Danielle before they did, but not in the way I expected. She was not hiding the way someone hunted would hide. She was moving, adapting, staying just ahead of something she clearly understood without ever being part of my world. When I finally saw her again, standing at the edge of a crowded street like she belonged exactly where she was, something inside me settled and broke at the same time. She looked at me, not surprised, not relieved, just aware. You lost it all, she said, her voice calm, like she had already accepted what I had only just begun to live through. I nodded once. I chose to. That was the truth. No justification. No defense. Just ownership. She studied me for a moment, not searching for weakness but for something else. Consistency. You showed up, she said quietly. Let that sink in. Not you saved me. Not you fixed it. Just that I showed up. For the first time that was enough. But this was not a clean ending. There was no instant forgiveness. No dramatic reunion that erased everything that had happened. She did not step into my arms. She did not pretend the world we came from had not tried to tear her apart. Instead she set a boundary, clear and unshakable. You chose me, she continued, her eyes steady on mine. Now you have to learn how to deserve that choice. Those words stayed with me longer than anything else. Because choosing her was only the beginning. Living that choice was something else entirely. I no longer had a name that opened doors or silenced threats. I had to build something real, something that did not rely on fear or control. Day by day. Action by action. Presence the way she defined it. It was harder than anything I had ever done because for the first time there was no shortcut. No power to lean on. Just me. And strangely that was the only thing that felt real. I did not get everything back. I did not rebuild an empire. That was never the point. What I gained was something I had never been given before. A chance to become someone without the weight of a name deciding who I had to be. I lost the Shin legacy. I lost the protection. I lost the certainty that came with it. But I gained something else. Choice. Real choice. And that changed everything. Because a name can be inherited. Power can be taken. But the person you become after losing both. That is something you build yourself. I lost my name. But for the first time I started becoming someone worth having one. Sometimes, losing everything is the only way you finally see what actually matters. Not the name. Not the power. Not the version of yourself built to survive in a world that never cared if you were human. Just the choices you make when there is nothing left to hide behind. If this story made you feel something real, if it made you question what you would choose when everything is on the line, then stay with me. Hit like if you believe love is not about what you can give, but who you are willing to become. Subscribe if you want more stories where power is tested, and people are forced to choose between control and truth. And tell me in the comments, if it cost you your name, would you still choose her?